Hey, welcome back. I know it's been quite some time since I've had the opportunity to do one of these. Just about ready to go into the gym. One thing I did want to talk about, which I have touched on before, is a lot of people, of course, complaining about why the borders are wide open. One of the, I ran a swimming pool business, with a couple employees, nothing crazy, but I did it for a very long time, from the age of 17 till about 32. One of the biggest input costs into running a business is always going to be your employees' wages. And so when you have a limited pool to pull from, like in America, you're seeing that there are more available jobs because the economy is expanding than there are available workers. And so obviously the remedy for that is either one, you have children to keep pace with growth, which America can't do because women are the majority voters. And since women always vote for more welfare and the expansion of government, they don't need children to take care of them. Neither do they need husbands. And that's why you're going to see, there was an article, I'll probably leave it in the link, talking about the SHEconomy and how by 2030, women the age of 25 to 44 or 40, where it said something like 45% of them are going to be single. Why? Because most of those women will be working. They won't even have the opportunity to be housewives. They'll be what men have been for the longest, basically slaves to work and to the government, because this is what they voted for. And so obviously, because Americans aren't having kids, what they have to do is they have to import, right, through immigration. And so that's why the borders are wide open. Now, that helps lower input costs because now America has other individuals to do simple labor, right? Which is what people got offended about, that Nancy Pelosi talked about. Nancy Pelosi talked about how the farmers in Florida were complaining and saying, "Hey, why are you shipping all of these Hispanics to the north? We need them down here in the south to pick the fruit," right? Because they want to help lower the cost of food. And one of the biggest costs of food is obviously you need someone to pick it off the vine, wash it, and get it ready to get shipped out. And of course, you can't pay a living wage to do that. Americans wouldn't be able to work for the money that many of these, Hispanic laborers who are here for a time being, and then they go back to Mexico. So the wage, it works for them. They get to live on the farm, or maybe they have like an area that's provided by the government where the people live. And then once the work is over, they go back to Mexico, where that money goes goes further. And Americans will take those jobs. You already see it right now. There are a lot of fast food industries, like for example in California, where they're paying over $20 an hour just at McDonald's just to flip burgers. And so what's the cost of those burgers going to be? What will happen is people will just stop eating out because the cost will be too high. And so you need to have more laborers. And this is the problem across the entire West. What happens in Europe is Europe tried this, but they don't have a Hispanic culture to pull from. Where do they pull from? They pulled from the Middle East. And that didn't work out because they don't share the same values. They're Muslims, right? And so they don't have the sort of freeness with women, that women can wear whatever they want. So it was a huge culture clash. And that's why you see like a lot of these riots going on with many of these Muslim men, and they're running around yelling, Allah Akbar. But America doesn't have that problem because it can pull from the southern border, primarily from Mexico and of course the countries south of Mexico. And they share a very similar sort of culture. Most of those individuals are Christians or some form of Christianity. And so there isn't a big cultural clash when those workers come here. And so that's why the southern border is open. It's overwhelmingly because Americans aren't having kids. You can just easily look this up. The birth rate is at a 50-year low, and it will continue in that direction. And that's just because of the welfare. Every country that has all these extensive welfare programs goes through the exact same problem. Just look at Japan. Japan has already accepted the hyperinflation route. And so obviously they don't have kids because of the welfare programs that provide for the women. And so the women don't need to have children to help provide for them when they get older. This is the story of the West. Now, the reason, of course, why none of this can change is because women make up the vast majority of the voting base. And so this is what democracy does. Democracy always ends with fiscal irresponsibility, and eventually it ends up in a dictatorship. Because when you fiscally crash, the government wants to, of course, retain their power. The only way that the government can do that is they need to seize the means of production. And this is typically what you see in socialism, which is just soft communism. Eventually, the government says, you know what? Instead of just letting things go to shit and the country crashing and hitting the wall, and basically the system crashes, they seize the means of production and they start controlling key infrastructure, typically with energy and food. And that's why you see an energy crisis in many of these countries in the West, because they understand that eventually the money runs out. And so what they do is they nationalize the energy sectors, and then they attack the farmers. And this is what you're going to see moving forward. Of course, the more you see this and the more it's implicated in places like, for example, in Europe, and you see it in Norway. The reason that they do this is because they need a crisis so that the government can go in and seize authority over and just blame it on the greedy farmers or blame it on the greedy energy corporations, or you don't love the planet, all this bullshit. Now, of course, when you create the crisis, the people will eventually call the government for help. And that's what the government depends on. They depend on the people to give them their authority. That's what they want. They want the people to, in essence, give them the go-ahead to do something. What is the government going to do? They're going to seize the means of production. They're going to nationalize many of these sectors that are key, because he who controls the energy, he who controls the currency, he who controls the food, controls the people, and you control the country. And this is basically what is going on in a lot of these Western countries. We're not really seeing it here in America yet, but there are people, of course, with the whole climate agenda that are attacking the farmers, and they're saying that the problem is the farmers, that farmers are causing global warming. And of course, where are you going to get your food from? Many of these individuals are okay, and you see this with what goes on in China. We'll pat ourselves on the back and say, well, we don't cause pollution here because we've outlawed X, Y, and Z. But all they're doing is just basically taking their business that was run here in China and run here in America, and they're just moving it over to China, and China will pollute over there. And we're all on the same planet. It's like, somebody smoking on one end of a boxcar and you sitting on the other end saying, well, at least, we're not smoking on this side. It doesn't matter, because you're all sharing the same air. But this is what the West does. This is what the culture in the West does, where individuals want to virtue signal that, well, we're saving the planet over here. We're against the farmers. We're against the cows. We're against the milk. We're against the oil. But where are you going to get your food? Well, what they're going to do is they're going to outsource it to brown and black nations. And then, of course, they'll just print the money. They'll just print money so that they can buy the resources that they need from black and brown countries and other countries, and then they'll just inflate the currency, which makes it harder for those people to live. And this is what you're watching. This is what America did. This is why America did it, to make it harder for those up and coming and industrial nations where they're starting to grow. And so how do you push those people down? How do you suppress their ability to get ahead? You increase the currency, right? You inflate the currency. What does that do? It makes it more lucrative for the people in those countries to sell to us, because they're already in debt, because they're in debt to the dollar. And so what it does is it forces those producers in those countries, instead of selling to their own people, they sell to Western countries, because it's more lucrative, because the government will just print the money and give it to the people, and then the people, of course, will buy the goods and services that they need overseas from people who are basically struggling. And this has been going on for a very long time. And this is what America has basically been doing for quite some time. This is one of the reasons why they print so much of the currency, to devalue the currency so that it makes it harder for those people to then sell to their own people. They end up forcing to sell. But the long run is that eventually those countries will catch up. Eventually those countries will catch up as those resources keep leaving our country. We're giving them dollar. They're using those assets, those dollars, to buy assets, and then they continue to grow. Eventually you run out of other people's money. The government can't keep monetizing the debt future generations. Eventually it runs out where you're not able to do it, and what you get is what we have right now, where you have a lot of people that just don't want to work and don't want to produce, or they are working and they're doing what they refer to as quiet quitting, where they feel that they're not being paid enough because of the inflation that is voted on by the American people. And so what they do is they do just enough just not to get them quit, just not to get them fired, because they don't want to quit and they want to still get paid. This doesn't work, but this is what you get. China is going through the exact same thing with their young generation, which is what they call themselves the lying down generation, where people don't want to produce. And it's a different scenario because those people, of course, are actively oppressed under communism. America is just basically a few generations behind China, but we're working our way there. That's why you see the push for a central bank digital currency. Eventually, you'll hear more about digital ID, the push for digital ID, and this is for the purpose of course, controlling people. If you don't do what the government says, if you say things that the government doesn't like, if you post something on social media that the government doesn't like, but this is inherently voted on by the people. This is always voted on by the people. The people push for socialism. Socialism always ends in a dictatorship. Democracy always ends in a dictatorship because of fiscal irresponsibility. And in our country and in the West, it's overwhelmingly voted on by the women. The women will vote America into poverty, and then they'll just become prostitutes, just like in Venezuela. Just like in Venezuela, they pushed for tax the rich. They had the slut walks. They had to make them pay their fair share time period. And what did it lead to? It led to their eventual destruction. America is only able to do it and only able to hold on to it because they are the world reserve currency. But other countries, as a result of what America is doing, are actively looking for ways to get around the dollar, doing deals outside of the dollar. That's why another reason why America printed so much money, so that commodities would become more expensive for smaller nations. What would that result in? Them printing money to buy dollars, which is why you're seeing the dollar start to rise, so that they can buy those commodities, driving those nations further into debt so that they can be further enslaved by the system. This is the system that we live under. It's one of the reasons, I should say probably the main reason, when you look at the Bible, that in the book of Proverbs says that when you take out debt, that you become a slave to the debtor, to the lender, right? And this is what we have. This is the famous scripture that basically Dave Ramsey built his whole career around, that those who end up becoming debt slaves to America. And that's how America exists. Just look at how much America is able to consume by population comparison. America consumes roughly 20 to 30% of all of the resources in the globe annually, and they only represent a very small amount of the population. But this is where we are. Eventually, it will go away, and you'll witness a very great collapse in America. The most important thing you can do is have a skill. The next thing you'll need is a community, and then of course you'll need your own land so that you can produce. If these people are going to start attacking the farmers, the price of food is going to rise, and it's going to rise by a lot. And you're going to see other smaller nations that are going to starve, and eventually production will go down. And the only thing that the government will be able to do, as much as they're able to print money, they cannot print food, which is why you hear so much talk about synthetic food, where they can make this stuff that is cancer causing and is terrible for you, but they can easily produce it in a lab, or eat the bugs and live in the pot, right? This is their solution to the problems that in essence the people have created for themselves and co-signed by not pushing back against the government, creating currency, expanding the debt, and basically giving women voting rights. That's why nothing will ever change, because the only way for these things to change is you have to take women's voting rights away, because women will always vote for the expansion of government, i.e. welfare. Because the only way that you can have that is you have to be willing to elect people who are corrupt, to steal money from other people so that they can give it to you, the person that they voted for. And this is the eventual end of how the system will collapse. How long it will take, whether it will happen in our generation, things are being sped up because of everything that is going on politically in the world. We'll just have to wait and see and prepare. But the most important thing that you can have is a skill, i.e. a trade as a man. Do not become indebted in mundane things like credit card debt. And of course, buy your own land and look for like-minded individuals so that if you choose to leave and go to another country, you'll be in the position to do so. Most importantly, do not date American or Western women. Do not procreate with these people. You will all they will do is utilize the weapon of the state, the gun of the state, to extract resources from you if they choose to just leave and take cash and prizes with them. If you want that sort of a lifestyle as a young person, get a skill, live a minimalist life, and travel abroad to a patriarchal country. Yes, it will be more dangerous. It'll be very different than the world here. But at the very least, you won't have to worry about the laws and being, having half of your stuff taken from you and basically being a slave to a woman who is basically enslaved herself to the state. Anyway, I'm going to leave it here. It's time to go to the gym. Thanks for watching, and I'll check you next time.